I'm Ashley Morgan, 34, and today I signed the papers on a $5.2 million mansion. My hands shook as I wrote my name, remembering my parents' dismissive words that haunted me for decades. You'll never own a house like your brother. My journey from underestimated daughter to tech CEO wasn't easy. The look on my family's faces when they realized I bought the dream house Thomas had been bragging about for months was worth every cent of that $5.2 million. Before I dive into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy stories about proving people wrong. This journey has twists and turns you won't believe. Stick around to see how I turned family betrayal into the ultimate success story. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Boston, it didn't take long to realize I was living in my brother's shadow. Our modest colonial house on Maple Street was comfortable enough, but inside those walls, the emotional architecture was starkly divided. One side bathed in the warm glow of parental approval for my brother Thomas, the other side, where I resided, perpetually cool and dim. Thomas was 3 years older, and to my parents, he hung the moon. I still remember bringing home my report card in 4th grade straight, as that I'd worked tirelessly for only to have my mother Catherine glance at it and say, "That's expected from you, Ashley." That same evening, Thomas proudly presented his report card speckled with B's and a concerning C in math. My father Brian clapped him on the back, announcing we'd go out for ice cream to celebrate his improvement. "Your brother has to work harder for his grades," my mother explained when she caught me crying in my bedroom later. "You should be grateful learning comes easily to you." But academics weren't the only arena where this disparity played out. When Thomas turned 13, my father started including him in man-to-man talks about business and investing. I'd hover near the doorway of my father's home office, listening to explanations about stocks and real estate, hungry for knowledge. "Dad, can I learn about business too?" I asked one Saturday when I was 11. My father chuckled, exchanging a knowing look with Thomas. "These are things you won't need to worry about, sweetheart. Better to help your mother in the kitchen. You'll need those skills someday." My mother had different plans for me entirely. While Thomas was being groomed to conquer the financial world, I was being prepared for what my parents considered the pinnacle of female achievement. A good marriage. "Sit up straight, Ashley. No man wants a wife with poor posture," my mother would say. Or, "Learn to make this pot roast properly, it's your father's favorite." A way to a man's heart, you know. The Christmas when I was 12 crystallized everything. Our family had a tradition of opening one gift on Christmas Eve. That year, Thomas unwrapped a sleek laptop top of the line for 2001. "For your future, son," my father said proudly. "You'll need this for your business ideas." When my turn came, I tore into my package with equal excitement, only to find sensible sweaters in colors my mother thought brought out my eyes. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I crept downstairs and sat in front of Thomas's new laptop. I opened a browser and searched how to learn computer programming. By morning, I'd taught myself the basics of HTML and knew this was what I wanted to do with my life despite what my parents had planned. I couldn't access Thomas's laptop regularly, so I stayed after school, using the computer lab to teach myself coding. My grades remained perfect, not because it came easily as my mother assumed, but because I stayed up late studying after completing my self-assigned programming tutorials. The first real betrayal came during my freshman year of high school. Thomas, then a senior, was struggling with his science project, a computer program that would model simple ecological systems. He asked for my help, and I spent weeks writing the code for him, thrilled that he had finally recognized my abilities. On the night of the science fair, I stood beaming as Thomas demonstrated his project to our parents. "How did you learn to do this?" my father asked, genuinely impressed. Thomas glanced at me briefly before answering. "Just picked it up. It's pretty intuitive once you understand the logic." My parents never knew about my contribution. That night, as they took Thomas out to celebrate his genius with his favorite steak dinner, I stayed home, allegedly fighting a headache. In reality, I was fighting back tears and making a vow to myself. If my family couldn't see my worth, I would build something so undeniable they would have no choice but to recognize it. I just didn't know then how long and painful that road would be. By the time I graduated high school at 17, I had a clear vision for my future that ran completely counter to my parents' expectations. While they had half-heartedly suggested community college with an eye toward meeting a suitable husband, I had secretly applied to several top-tier universities with strong computer science programs. When the acceptance letter from MIT arrived with a partial scholarship, I thought finally my parents would see my potential. Computer science? My mother frowned over her reading glasses. Wouldn't something like education or nursing be more appropriate? My father was more blunt. We're not paying for that. If Thomas wanted to study computer science at MIT, that would be different. He could actually use that degree to build something. You're just going to get married eventually anyway. Those words burned, but they didn't deter me. I took out student loans, found 3 part-time jobs, and moved to Cambridge with exactly 2 suitcases and a second-hand laptop I'd saved for over 2 years to buy. Meanwhile, Thomas had been accepted to Harvard Business School with my parents covering every expense from tuition to his luxury apartment near campus. I lived in the smallest room of a crowded house shared with 5 other students, eating ramen and working at the university library, a coffee shop, and doing freelance web design between classes and studying. I saw my family only on major holidays, when I'd take the bus home to endure their questions about when I'd come to my senses and choose a more suitable path. During my sophomore year, Thomas dropped out of Harvard, announcing he was too entrepreneurial for traditional education. Instead of the disappointment I had faced for merely choosing the wrong major, my parents celebrated Thomas's decision as bold and visionary. "College isn't for everyone," my father said proudly. "Some people are built for the real world." The double standard was staggering, but I channeled my frustration into my studies, graduating with highest honors in computer science and business. At my graduation ceremony, my mother commented on how lovely my dress was, while my father asked if I'd met any promising young men. Neither mentioned my academic achievements or asked about my career plans, though I'd already accepted a position at a tech startup in Boston. My starting salary was modest, but it was a foot in the door. The hours were brutal, often 80-hour weeks of coding, debugging, and learning the business side of tech. I shared a tiny apartment with 2 roommates and continued to live frugally, saving as much as I could while building my skills and professional network. That Thanksgiving, I made the mistake of sharing an idea. I'd been developing an app that would help people manage personal finances in a more intuitive way than existing tools. I thought my family might finally take interest in my work. As I explained the concept at the dinner table, I noticed Thomas's expression change from boredom to sudden interest. "That's actually not bad, Ashley," he said, asking several detailed questions about the market and implementation. 2 weeks later, my mother called to share wonderful news. Thomas had just received $50,000 in funding from my parents to develop a brilliant new app for financial management. My stomach dropped as she described what was unmistakably my idea. When I confronted Thomas, he was unapologetic. "You were just talking theory. I'm actually building it. That's the difference between us, you think. I do." I was devastated, not just by Thomas's betrayal but by my parents' unwavering support of it. They had never offered me a penny for my education, yet freely handed Thomas a sum that would have covered a year of my tuition for an idea he had stolen. 6 months later, Thomas's venture collapsed due to poor execution and his lack of technical knowledge. The $50,000 was gone, written off by my parents as a learning experience. My idea, which could have been viable with the right development, was now tainted, and I had to start from scratch. This period was the lowest of my life. I questioned my worth, my abilities, and whether I would ever break free from the role my family had assigned me. But amid this darkness came a pivotal moment that changed everything. At a tech networking event I almost skipped due to exhaustion, I met Rachel Winters, a veteran software developer who had founded and sold 2 successful companies. Something about my determination must have impressed her, because she took me under her wing. "The tech world doesn't care about your family drama," she told me bluntly over coffee. "It cares about what you can build and how well it solves real problems. So build something undeniable." With Rachel's mentorship, I began to see my family's perception of me for what it was, a limitation I didn't have to accept. I decided then that I would build my career without their support or validation. It was time to leave Boston and my family's shadow behind. San Francisco welcomed me with its iconic fog and the promise of reinvention. I arrived with 2 suitcases just as I had at MIT, but this time with 3 years of industry experience and a determination that burned hotter than ever. I rented a tiny studio apartment in the Mission District that consumed nearly half my salary but put me in the heart of the tech ecosystem I needed to break into. My first 6 months in the Bay Area were a crash course in imposter syndrome. In Boston, I'd been a big fish in a small pond at my startup. Here, I was surrounded by brilliant minds from Google, Apple, and countless innovative startups. At networking events, I'd stand in the corner, clutching my drink, wondering if anyone could see through me to the insecure girl whose family never thought she'd amount to anything. "You know what your problem is?" my new colleague Jasmine said after witnessing my awkward attempt to contribute to a technical discussion. "You apologize before you even speak. Stop undermining yourself." Her words hit home. How much of my parents' perception had I internalized? How often did I sabotage myself before others even had a chance to judge me? I started a new practice before meetings or networking events. I'd go to the bathroom, look in the mirror, and say aloud, "You belong here, your ideas matter." Slowly, I began to find my voice and my unique approach to app development. While many developers were focused on technical elegance or flashy features, I obsessed over user experience, how to make complex financial concepts accessible to everyone. This perspective came directly from my own experiences growing up in a family where financial knowledge was treated as a male birthright. My breakthrough came unexpectedly. After a particularly frustrating day at work, I stayed late coding a personal project, a simplified prototype of the financial management app Thomas had failed to execute. By morning, I had a basic functioning demo that I impulsively showed to my team during our coffee break. "This is exactly what my mother needs," said my project manager, Alex. "She's terrified of financial apps but wants to be more independent with her money after my dad passed." Within a week, 5 colleagues had asked if they could share the prototype with family members who were similarly intimidated by existing financial tools. The feedback was consistent. My intuitive, jargon-free approach filled a gap in the market. For 3 months, I worked on the app every night after my day job, refining it based on user feedback. I named it Clear Cash and prepared to show it to potential investors. But before I could, an unexpected call from home threatened to derail everything. "Thomas has had a setback," my mother said, her voice tight with worry. "His business partner ran off with their investment money, and he's in a tough spot. He's too proud to ask, but we thought, since you're doing so well in California." The request wasn't subtle. They wanted me to bail out Thomas. Despite my meager savings and the fact that I was pouring every spare dollar into developing my app, my parents assumed I should help the brother who had never helped me. "How much does he need?" I asked, already knowing I would regret it. "20,000 would get him back on his feet." "We'd help, but the house needs a new roof." I transferred the money the next day, nearly all my savings, telling myself it was the last time I would let my family dynamics pull me backward. When the money was received, there was no thank you from Thomas, just a text from my mother saying, "Thomas will pay you back when he can." That money was never repaid or mentioned again. But in an ironic twist, it became the best investment I could have made in my own determination. With my savings gone, I had no safety net. ClearCash had to succeed. There was no plan B. 2 weeks later, I met Damon Carter at a pitch competition where I presented ClearCash. Damon was a venture capitalist known for funding outsider entrepreneurs, people without Stanford degrees or family connections in the industry. He approached me afterward with pointed questions about user acquisition and monetization strategies. I answered candidly, including what I didn't know yet but planned to learn. "Most people oversell," he said. "You're the first presenter today who acknowledged limitations instead of hiding them. That's rare." 3 meetings later, Damon's firm offered $250,000 in seed funding for 10% of my company. The night I signed the paperwork, I allowed myself a moment of pure joy dancing around my tiny apartment to Survivor by Destiny's Child. For once, I had achieved something my brother couldn't take credit for or my parents dismiss. The celebration was short-lived. The following weekend, Thomas called me directly for the first time in years. "Hey sis," he said with uncharacteristic warmth. "Heard about your funding round. Impressive. I've been thinking about getting back into tech myself. Maybe we could collaborate? I've got the business expertise. You've got the technical skills, could be a perfect match." In that moment, I realized Thomas didn't see me as successful, he saw me as useful. For him, my achievement wasn't something to respect, but something to exploit. With a calm I didn't know I possessed, I declined his offer and established a boundary that would define our relationship moving forward. I believe in you, Thomas, but our professional lives need to remain separate. The hurt in his silence was palpable, but for once, I wasn't the one feeling inadequate. As I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. The first brick in the foundation of my self-worth had been firmly laid. The next 3 years passed in a blur of 18-hour days, pitch meetings, product iterations, and team building. ClearCash evolved from my personal project into a full-fledged financial technology company with a mission to democratize financial management. We expanded from basic budgeting tools to personalized financial education, automated savings features, and investment guidance for beginners. Every decision I made was informed by the question, would someone like my mother understand this? It became our competitive edge. While other fintech apps catered to the financially savvy, we built for everyone else. Our user base grew from thousands to hundreds of thousands, primarily through word of mouth. My team expanded from just me to 3 people working out of a co-working space, then to 30 employees in our own office in Soma. I hired people who shared my vision of accessible financial tools, many of whom had their own stories of financial exclusion or intimidation. As ClearCash gained traction, my personal life remained almost non-existent. I dated occasionally, but never seriously. Past relationships had faltered under the weight of my work schedule and lingering trust issues from my family dynamics. My closest relationships were with my early employees and with Damon, who had become a mentor as well as an investor. I maintained minimal contact with my family through occasional calls with my mother, who would update me on Thomas's latest ventures without ever asking substantive questions about my business. I learned to accept this dynamic without expecting it to change. Then came the email that disrupted my careful emotional equilibrium. Thomas had applied for a senior position at ClearCash through our careers page, using his network to bypass initial screenings. His resume landed on my desk with a note from HR, "Thought you should see this personally." The resume was impressive, if mostly fictional. Thomas had positioned himself as a fintech visionary with entrepreneurial experience. He listed advisory roles with startups that, upon quick investigation, either didn't exist or had no record of his involvement. I was tempted to reject the application immediately, but decided professional courtesy required at least a phone call. That conversation revealed Thomas's true intentions. "Look, we both know I'd be an asset," he said when I questioned his qualifications. "My network alone would open doors for ClearCash with major financial institutions." "What exactly do you know about our product?" I asked. His vague answer confirmed my suspicions. He hadn't bothered to understand what we built. He simply saw a successful company he could attach himself to. I thanked him for his interest but declined to move forward with his candidacy. 2 days later, I received an alarming call from our head of security. Someone had attempted to access our product development servers using credentials stolen from one of our engineers. The attempt was traced back to an IP address in Boston where Thomas was living. Further investigation revealed Thomas had taken the engineer out for drinks, claiming to be scoping out the company culture for his upcoming executive role. The engineer, not knowing our family history, had left his laptop unattended briefly during their meeting. When confronted with evidence of the attempted breach, Thomas denied everything. I had no choice but to consult with our legal team about pursuing charges for attempted corporate espionage. Before we could file, my parents called in a panic. "How could you accuse your brother of such things?" my father demanded. "He was only trying to understand your business better before joining. This is what happens when families let business come between them." "Thomas has no job offer from ClearCash," I replied, stunned by the fabrication. "And attempting to access our proprietary technology is illegal." "He's your brother, Ashley," my mother pleaded. "He made a mistake because he admires what you've built and wants to be part of it. Surely you can find a role for him instead of destroying his reputation?" In that moment, I realized my family would always defend Thomas, regardless of his actions. They would always expect me to sacrifice my boundaries, my company, and my integrity to protect him from consequences. "I won't press charges," I finally said, "but I need space from all of you right now." I didn't take their calls for the next 6 months, the most peaceful months of my adult life. Without the emotional drain of managing family dynamics, I poured my energy into ClearCash. We launched a major product update, secured an additional funding round, and were featured in TechCrunch as the financial app for everyone else. During this period, I met Serena Kim, a brilliant PR strategist who helped reshape our public narrative from simple finance app to financial empowerment platform. Serena quickly became both a key business advisor and a close friend who understood ambition without apologizing for it. Your family's inability to see your worth isn't a reflection of you, it's a limitation in them, she told me over late-night takeout in the office. Some people can only value what they understand, and they don't understand you. When ClearCash won Financial App of the Year at a prestigious industry conference, I finally broke my silence and sent my parents the press release. My mother's response was a deflating, "How nice, dear. Did you hear Thomas is getting into real estate development? Your father is so proud." The familiar sting returned, but this time, it was accompanied by something new in difference. Their approval, which I had craved for decades, suddenly seemed irrelevant compared to what I had built. ClearCash now had a valuation of $10 million, a dedicated team of 35, and over 1 million users who trusted us with their financial futures. I was no longer the girl desperate to be seen by her parents. I was a CEO who had created something valuable through vision and perseverance. If my family couldn't acknowledge that, perhaps it was their loss, not mine. My grandmother Evelyn's 80th birthday created an obligation I couldn't ignore. Despite the 6-month communication freeze with my parents and Thomas, I would never disappoint the one family member who had always shown me unconditional support. Grandma Evelyn had secretly slipped me books on computer programming when I was a teenager, and had been the only one to send me a congratulatory card when ClearCash received its first round of funding. The celebration was held at my parents' home, now renovated and expanded thanks to my father's successful accounting practice. Walking through the front door felt like stepping into a time warp, the familiar scent of my mother's potpourri, the sound of my father's booming laugh from the living room, and the instant tightening in my chest that accompanied family gatherings. "Ashley, finally!" My grandmother's face lit up as she spotted me. Her genuine delight momentarily washed away my apprehension. "Come tell me everything about California. Your mother says you never call, but I know you're busy changing the world." Before I could respond, Thomas appeared, champagne flute in hand, looking prosperous in a tailored suit that probably cost more than he could afford. "The tech mogul returns to the humble family nest," he announced loudly enough for nearby relatives to hear. "How's the app business, sis? Still helping people count their pennies?" I forced a smile. ClearCash helps people build financial independence, actually. We just passed 2 million users. "Impressive," he nodded, though his eyes showed no real admiration. "I've moved on to bigger things myself. Real estate development, actual tangible assets, you know? Not just digital ones." Throughout the afternoon, I navigated a minefield of loaded questions and backhanded compliments from extended family members who seemed to have absorbed my parents' narrative about my life choices. My cousin Julia asked if I was still single because of work, while my uncle wondered aloud if computer jobs have staying power or if it's just a bubble. I maintained a polite facade until dinner, when Thomas commanded the table's attention by tapping his glass. "Since the family's all together, I wanted to share some exciting news," he announced. "My development company has just secured preliminary approval to purchase and redevelop Westlake Mansion." Murmurs spread around the table. Westlake Mansion was a historic property in our hometown, a magnificent estate built in the 1920s that had fallen into disrepair after the elderly owner moved to assisted living. "We're planning to convert it into luxury condominiums while preserving its historic character," Thomas continued. "It's a $20 million project that will transform the neighborhood and create substantial returns for our investors." My father beamed with pride. Thomas has a visionary approach to real estate. He sees potential where others see problems. "The financing is nearly complete," Thomas added, with a pointed glance in my direction, "just waiting on the final investors to commit. We expect to close on the property within 60 days. The conversation for the rest of the evening revolved entirely around Thomas's project, the architectural plans, the projected profits, the prestige of being associated with such a high-profile development. My mother kept directing acquaintances to Thomas with introductions like, "Have you heard about Thomas's amazing project? He's revitalizing the town's most iconic property." I excused myself early, claiming an important conference call with international clients. As I gathered my coat, I overheard Thomas speaking to my father and Uncle Harold in the study, the door partially open. Tech bubble is bound to burst, Thomas was saying. Ashley's company will be worthless when it does, but she's made some useful connections with venture capital firms. I'm thinking of leveraging her Silicon Valley network for the next phase of expansion. Have you asked her? My uncle inquired. My father laughed. She owes her brother after that security incident nonsense. Family should support family, not threaten legal action. I'll approach her when the timing is right, Thomas replied. She's always been desperate for family approval. A few well-placed compliments about her business acumen, and she'll be eager to help prove herself. I froze in the hallway, a familiar sick feeling washing over me. They were discussing me as if I were a resource to be exploited, not a person, much less a successful entrepreneur in my own right. The casual dismissal of my company's value and the assumption that I remained desperate for their approval showed how little they understood who I'd become. Before I could process this betrayal, Thomas emerged from the study and spotted me. Ashley. Perfect timing. I was hoping to talk to you privately before you left. His voice shifted into the smooth, persuasive tone he used for business pitches. Got a minute? Against my better judgment, I followed him to the back porch where we had spent summers as children. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of my mother's rose garden. Look, I know things have been tense between us, he began, but that's in the past. I've been watching what you've built with ClearCash, and I'm impressed, truly. Thank you, I replied cautiously. I've actually been thinking we could collaborate on this Westlake project. Your financial technology could help our investors track their returns in real time, and my development could be a case study for your platform. Win-win. I studied my brother's face, searching for sincerity but finding only calculation. And you'd like introductions to my venture capital contacts? Thomas's expression flickered briefly before recovering. Eventually, perhaps. But this is about synergy, Ashley. Combining our strengths, my real-world development expertise, your tech background. Mom and Dad would be thrilled to see us working together. The mention of our parents was the final confirmation I needed. This wasn't about respect for what I'd built or genuine reconciliation. It was another attempt to use me while diminishing my accomplishments. I don't mix family and business anymore, Thomas. It's never ended well. His friendly demeanor vanished instantly. Still holding grudges, I see. This is why you've always been your own worst enemy, Ashley. You can't take a compliment, can't accept help, can't see when people are trying to include you. Include me? Or use me? Because I just heard you planning to leverage my network while predicting my company's failure. Thomas's face flushed. Eavesdropping now? Real professional. About as professional as attempting to hack into my company's servers, I countered. What followed was the most honest conversation we'd ever had, a heated argument where years of resentment surfaced. Thomas accused me of thinking I was too good for the family since finding success. I confronted him about the pattern of taking credit for others' work and the constant belittling of my achievements. You've always been jealous of me, he finally said, his voice rising. The favorite son who got everything handed to him, isn't that your perpetual complaint? Poor Ashley, always the victim. Have you considered that maybe I deserved the support because I had actual potential? That maybe our parents invested in me because they knew I'd actually build something real, not just an app that any college kid could create in a weekend? The words stung, but they also crystallized everything. In Thomas's mind, and likely my parents' physical, tangible assets like real estate would always be more real than the digital company I had built, regardless of its valuation or impact. I left the gathering without saying goodbye to anyone except my grandmother. Driving back to my hotel, I made two decisions that would change the trajectory of both my business and my relationship with my family forever. First, ClearCash would open a second office in Boston, allowing me to spend more time in my hometown and establish a stronger East Coast presence. Second, I would learn everything there was to know about Westlake Mansion and Thomas's development plans. If my brother thought my digital expertise made me easy to dismiss, perhaps it was time to beat him at his own real-world game. 3 months after my grandmother's birthday party, ClearCash's valuation reached $100 million following a major investment round led by a consortium of financial institutions looking to modernize their digital offerings. Our user base had expanded to nearly 5 million people, and our team had grown to over 100 employees across San Francisco and our new Boston office. My return to Boston was strategically timed. I purchased a modest but elegant brownstone in Beacon Hill not to impress anyone, but to establish roots in a city I'd fled years ago. The Boston office became our East Coast headquarters, focused on institutional partnerships and financial education initiatives. My presence in town didn't go unnoticed. Former classmates reached out on social media, local business publications requested interviews, and eventually, my childhood friend Melissa Taylor invited me for coffee. "I honestly never thought you'd come back," she admitted as we settled into a corner table at a cafe near Boston Common. "You always seemed desperate to escape." "I was escaping circumstances, not the city," I clarified. "Boston has a thriving tech scene and makes sense for our expansion." After catching up on her life as a local real estate attorney, the conversation inevitably turned to town gossip. "Have you heard about Thomas's development project?" she asked, stirring her latte. "It's all anyone in real estate circles is talking about." "The Westlake Mansion?" "He mentioned it at our grandmother's birthday." Melissa leaned forward. "It's controversial. The mansion has significant historical value, and many residents are opposed to converting it to condos. There's a preservation society fighting to have it designated as a historical landmark, but they lack funding for the legal battle." She continued with insider details that hadn't been made public. Thomas's development company was operating on razor-thin margins, having overpaid for previous properties that hadn't delivered expected returns. The Westlake project represented a make-or-break opportunity for him. "Your brother's been throwing your name around, by the way," Melissa added casually, "implying you're advising on the project's financial structure. Several potential investors mentioned it at a Chamber of Commerce event." This was a new level of audacity, even for Thomas. Not only was he attempting to exploit my connections without permission, but he was falsely claiming my involvement to lend credibility to his struggling venture. "That's categorically untrue," I stated firmly. "Would you mind introducing me to someone from the Preservation Society? I'd like to understand their perspective." The following week, I met with Harold Pierce, the 86-year-old former owner of Westlake Mansion, who now lived in a nearby assisted living facility. Despite his advanced age, his mind remained sharp and his passion for the property evident. "I never wanted to sell," he explained as we walked slowly through the facility's garden. "But maintaining a 20-room mansion became impossible after my wife passed, the property taxes alone." He shook his head. "Your brother's offer seemed like the only option. He promised to preserve the architectural integrity, but recently he's been talking about modernization that sounds like gutting the interior." Harold had inherited the mansion from his grandfather, who built it in 1924. The property contained priceless architectural details, original woodwork, and gardens designed by a renowned landscape architect of the era. Beyond its physical attributes, it had hosted significant historical events and figures throughout the 20th century. "What would your ideal outcome be?" I asked. "To see it preserved as a cultural and educational space," he replied without hesitation. "The gardens open to the public, the main house serving as a museum and event venue that could sustain itself financially while maintaining its historical character." His vision resonated with me not just because it opposed Thomas's plans, but because it actually made sense both culturally and financially. Over the next several weeks, I immersed myself in research. I consulted with historical preservation experts, studied successful models of repurposed historic properties, and had my financial team create projections for Harold's vision versus Thomas's development plan. The numbers were revealing. While Thomas's luxury condos promised a quick profit if everything went perfectly, the long-term sustainability was questionable given the neighborhood demographics and current real estate market. The preservation approach, though requiring more initial investment, offered steady long-term returns through events, educational programs, and tourism, with significantly less market risk. I also discovered troubling details about Thomas's development company. They had taken shortcuts on previous projects, resulting in multiple building code violations. Their investor presentations contained projections based on market assumptions that even cursory research contradicted. Most concerning, they had misrepresented certain zoning approvals in their materials that hadn't actually been secured. During this investigation period, I maintained a low profile with my family. My parents called occasionally, usually to mention Thomas's latest press coverage or to ask when I'd find time to visit properly. I deflected graciously, citing my busy schedule with the Boston office launch. The town's business community, however, buzzed about my return. I accepted select speaking engagements and joined the local technology council, establishing myself as a business leader separate from my family's narrative. When asked about Thomas's project in these settings, I simply stated, "We support separate ventures to maintain professional boundaries." This careful positioning came to a head at a family dinner my mother insisted upon, claiming it had been too long since we'd all been together. I arrived prepared for the inevitable Thomas showcase that had characterized family gatherings throughout my life. Sure enough, Thomas dominated the conversation with updates about Westlake Mansion. "The financing is nearly complete," he announced. "We've got commitments for $18 million, with just the final $2 million pending. We'll break ground within 90 days. My father raised his glass to the biggest deal of Thomas's career, transforming Westlake into the most prestigious address in town. As everyone drank to Thomas's success, my mother turned to me with a practiced expression of interest. "And how is your app doing, dear? Still helping people with their budgets?" Before I could answer, Thomas interjected. "Ashley's company has actually been quite successful, Mom. She's built substantial connections in finance that could be valuable for future projects." The compliment, delivered with a pointed look at me, was clearly transactional. After dinner, Thomas cornered me in the kitchen while I helped my mother with dessert. "I need to finalize my investor group next week," he said quietly. "Your introduction to that venture capital firm you work with could make the difference." "I've been clear about keeping our business lives separate, Thomas." His expression hardened. "You should know that I've been looking into your company's financials. Dad still has access to your personal accounts from when he helped with your taxes years ago. Your liquidity position is impressive. You could actually invest directly if you wanted to be part of something tangible for once." The casual admission that he had accessed my personal financial information through our father sent a wave of anger through me. This invasion of privacy was the final confirmation that no boundary would be respected, no professional separation maintained. I smiled tightly. "Thank you for letting me know about Dad's access to my information. I'll be changing my accounts first thing tomorrow." The next morning, I didn't just change my accounts. I executed the plan I had been quietly developing for weeks. With my legal team's guidance, I submitted an all-cash offer to purchase Westlake Mansion for $5.2 million, 20% above the asking price that Thomas's company had negotiated, with no financing contingencies or inspection periods. The offer included specific provisions that Harold had requested: a conservation easement that would permanently protect the gardens, architectural protections for the main house, and a right for Harold to live in the property's carriage house apartment for the remainder of his life. While Thomas was still assembling his investor group and waiting on financing approvals, my offer provided Harold with immediate certainty and alignment with his preservation goals. He accepted within hours. The stage was set for a confrontation that had been brewing for decades, not just over a property, but over a lifetime of dismissal and underestimation that was about to be dramatically reversed. The day after submitting my offer for Westlake Mansion, I met Harold Pierce for breakfast at his assisted living facility. Despite the early hour, he was impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket and bow tie, his excitement evident in his brightened eyes and animated gestures. "I never thought I'd find a buyer who understood the soul of the place," he said, carefully buttering his toast with arthritic hands. "Your brother saw only square footage and potential profit margins." I spent several hours with Harold that morning, listening to the mansion's history, how his grandfather had built it after making his fortune in publishing, the famous authors who had visited its library, the garden parties that had brought the community together during difficult times. Each story reinforced that I was making the right decision, even if my initial motivation had been complicated by family dynamics. "Why are you really doing this, Ashley?" Harold finally asked, his keen eyes studying me. "You're a technology executive, not a historical preservationist." The question deserved honesty. "It started as a way to outmaneuver my brother," I admitted. "But the more I learned about the property and your vision for it, the more I realized this could be something meaningful, a legacy beyond code and algorithms." Harold nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer. "The best decisions often begin with mixed motives but find their true purpose along the way." That afternoon, I met with Karen Levinson, a preservation architect specializing in historic properties, to walk through the mansion and assess its condition. The property was even more impressive than photographs had suggested: sweeping staircases of hand-carved mahogany, original Tiffany light fixtures, a conservatory with a glass ceiling that flooded the space with natural light. "This place would be criminal to subdivide," Karen murmured, as we examined the library's built-in bookshelves. "The craftsmanship is irreplaceable." We spent hours cataloging immediate maintenance needs and developing a phased restoration plan. By sunset, I had a clear vision for the property that combined historical preservation with modern sustainability and community access, a vision entirely opposed to Thomas's luxury condominium concept. My lawyer called that evening to confirm that all paperwork was ready for the morning's closing. Everything had been expedited due to the all-cash nature of the purchase, with funds already wired to escrow. We would meet at Bridgewater and Associates, a prestigious local law firm, at 9 a.m. to sign the final documents. That night, my parents called to invite me to a celebration brunch, following Thomas's property closing the next day. "He's finally signing the papers for Westlake Mansion," my mother explained excitedly. "We're gathering at the club afterward to toast his biggest achievement yet." "What time is his closing?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. 11 o'clock at Bridgewater and Associates. The brunch reservation is for noon. I felt a momentary twinge of guilt knowing that Thomas would arrive at the law firm to discover the property had been sold 2 hours earlier. But I reminded myself of the countless times he had taken credit for my work, dismissed my accomplishments, and attempted to exploit my success for his benefit. This wasn't about revenge, it was about finally establishing that I was a capable business person in my own right, dealing in the tangible assets my family had always respected more than my digital company. The next morning, I arrived at Bridgewater and Associates at 8:45 a.m., dressed in a conservative navy suit, hair pulled back in a sleek bun. My lawyer met me in the lobby, briefcase in hand, her expression professionally neutral despite the unusual situation. "Everything's in order," she confirmed quietly. "Mr. Pierce arrived early and is already in the conference room. The seller's attorney has reviewed all documents." At precisely 9 a.m., we began the closing process. As I signed page after page, I felt a strange sense of closure that went beyond the real estate transaction. Each signature seemed to affirm not just my ownership of Westlake Mansion, but ownership of my own narrative, one no longer defined by my family's limited perception of me. By 10:30 a.m., the deed was recorded, and Westlake Mansion officially belonged to me. Harold handed me the original keys, ornate brass pieces that had been in his family for generations. "Use them wisely," he said with a gentle smile. "A house like this is never really owned, merely stewarded for future generations." As we gathered our paperwork, the receptionist's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Thomas Morgan and his party have arrived early for their 11 a.m. appointment." My heartbeat quickened. "Please tell them we're just finishing up and we'll be out shortly," I replied, nodding to the receptionist. Harold squeezed my hand. "Would you like me to leave through the back exit? This confrontation isn't my battle." "No," I said firmly. "You're a crucial part of this property's story. Besides, Thomas should understand exactly why his offer wasn't accepted." We exited the conference room together, myself, Harold, and our respective attorneys, just as Thomas was holding court in the reception area, surrounded by 3 men in expensive suits, who appeared to be his investors. "Landmark development that will transform the neighborhood," Thomas was saying confidently. "Once we close today, we'll begin the permit process immediately." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me, confusion crossing his face. "Ashley, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, his eyes shifted to Harold, then to the documents in my hand, and understanding dawned. His expression morphed from confusion to disbelief to fury in seconds. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. "Mr. Morgan," my attorney interjected smoothly, "Westlake Mansion was sold to my client this morning in an all-cash transaction that closed approximately 20 minutes ago. The deed has been recorded with the county." One of Thomas's investors stepped forward. "What is she talking about, Thomas? You assured us the property was under contract to your company." Thomas's face flushed deep red. "There must be some mistake. We have a binding agreement with Mr. Pierce." "You had a conditional offer that was contingent on financing and board approvals," Harold's attorney corrected. "Miss Morgan's offer was unconditional and preferable to my client for multiple reasons, including provisions for historical preservation." The next 30 minutes were chaotic. Thomas alternated between threatening legal action, attempting to negotiate with Harold, and pulling me aside to demand explanations. His investors departed quickly, their expressions ranging from embarrassment to anger. "You've been planning this for months," Thomas accused when we were momentarily alone in a corner of the reception area. "You deliberately undermined me." "I made a business decision to purchase a property that aligned with my investment goals," I replied calmly. "Just as you've made countless business decisions without consulting me. This is different. This was my project, my chance to build something significant. You only did this to spite me." There was a part of me that wanted to deny it, to claim purely philanthropic or business motives. But Thomas deserved at least this much honesty. "My motives were mixed," I admitted. "Yes, I wanted to prove I could compete in your real world of tangible assets. But I also genuinely believe my preservation plan is better for the property and the community than luxury condos." Thomas stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not just anger, but something like revelation, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "You really have changed," he said finally. "The Ashley I grew up with would never have had the nerve to pull something like this." I smiled slightly. That Ashley was constantly told what she couldn't do. This Ashley decided to find out for herself what's possible. As Thomas stormed out, I experienced a complex mixture of emotions, triumph tinged with sadness, that our relationship had deteriorated to this point, satisfaction at having finally commanded respect in the arena my family valued, and genuine excitement about the future of Westlake Mansion. Harold approached me after Thomas left. "Family complications aside, I believe you'll honor this property's legacy better than he would have." "I intend to," I promised, "starting today." Instead of attending my parents' celebratory brunch, which had undoubtedly been canceled, I returned to Westlake Mansion with Harold and Karen, the preservation architect. Standing in the grand entrance hall with sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, I felt the weight of both the past and future. This wasn't just a victory over Thomas or a statement to my family. It was the beginning of a new chapter that would blend my technological expertise with tangible, historical preservation, a legacy that couldn't be dismissed as just an app. The headline in the Boston Business Journal read, "Tech CEO Ashley Morgan acquires historic Westlake Mansion, plans community cultural center." The article detailed my preservation-focused vision for the property, contrasting it with the luxury condominium development that had been previously rumored. Harold Pierce was quoted praising the decision to maintain the mansion's historical integrity while making it accessible to the public. What the article didn't mention was the personal fallout that had begun the moment I signed those papers. My phone had exploded with notifications within hours of the closing missed calls from both parents, text messages ranging from confused to furious, and finally, an email from my father with the subject line, "Family meeting, non-negotiable." I gave myself 3 days to focus solely on Westlake before addressing the family situation. During that time, I assembled a team of historical preservation experts, established a nonprofit foundation to oversee the property's operations, and began the process of applying for landmark status to ensure its protection in perpetuity. The work was energizing and purposeful. Each morning, I arrived at the mansion at sunrise, walking the grounds with a cup of coffee, imagining the gardens restored to their former glory and open for public enjoyment. I pictured the ballroom hosting community events, the library serving as a writing and research center, the smaller rooms transformed into educational spaces for local schools. On the 4th day, I finally returned my parents' calls and agreed to meet them at their home that evening. I arrived to find not just my parents but Thomas as well, seated in the formal living room as if staging an intervention. "How could you do this to your brother?" My mother began before I'd even sat down. "He's worked for years on this development opportunity." My father's approach was more businesslike but equally accusatory. "You deliberately undermined a family member's business venture. That's not just unprofessional, it's unconscionable." I listened to their criticisms without interrupting, noting how neither asked about my plans for the property or acknowledged that I had completed a significant business transaction. When they finally paused, I spoke calmly. "I made a competitive offer on a property that aligned with my investment goals and values. The seller accepted my offer because it better served his interests. That's how business works." "This wasn't business, it was sabotage," Thomas interjected. "You knew I was pursuing that property. You only wanted it because I did." That's partly true, I admitted, seeing no point in complete denial. I became interested because of your interest, but my vision for the property is genuine. And unlike your condo conversion, my plan has the former owner's full support. You've cost me millions in potential profits, Thomas continued. My investors have pulled out of future projects because of this debacle. You've damaged my professional reputation permanently. My mother wiped away tears. We raised you to support family, not destroy their dreams. The irony of this statement, given their lifelong pattern of supporting Thomas's dreams while dismissing mine, was breathtaking. Still, I maintained my composure. I understand you're disappointed and angry, but this purchase was both legally and ethically sound. The property will be preserved rather than demolished, and the community will benefit from access to a historical landmark. Always the self-righteous one, Thomas scoffed. Pretending this is about preservation when it's really about proving yourself. There was enough truth in his accusation to sting, but I refused to be baited into a defensive posture. My motives aren't simple, and neither are yours. But the outcome speaks for itself. Westlake will remain intact for future generations instead of being carved into luxury units most locals couldn't afford. My father sighed heavily. You've chosen a building over your brother. I hope you're satisfied with that decision. The conversation continued in circles for another hour, with my parents repeatedly framing my business decision as a moral failing and betrayal of family values. When I finally left, my mother's parting words were cutting. Don't expect us at your ribbon-cutting ceremony. We stand with Thomas. The following weeks brought external validation but continued family friction. The local historical society publicly endorsed my preservation plan. The town council passed a resolution commending the decision to maintain the property's character. Donations poured into the newly established Westlake Foundation to support restoration efforts. Meanwhile, Thomas gave several bitter interviews to local publications, painting himself as the victim of corporate sabotage. In one particularly damaging piece, he claimed I had used insider information and family connections to undermine his development, conveniently omitting that he had attempted to hack my company's servers and falsely used my name to attract investors. My parents refused my calls after reading these interviews, apparently accepting Thomas's version without question. My father's accountant sent a formal letter terminating his services for my personal finances, the professional equivalent of disownment in our family. The severance was painful but clarifying. For years, I had maintained the fiction that with enough success, enough achievement, my family would finally see me as Thomas's equal. The Westlake situation had forced me to confront reality. No accomplishment would ever be sufficient to change their fundamental perception. During this difficult period, Damon and Serena became my lifelines. They flew to Boston when the situation was at its worst, providing both emotional support and practical business guidance. Family systems don't change easily, Serena observed as we walked through Westlake's overgrown gardens one evening. They're designed to maintain equilibrium, even if that equilibrium is dysfunctional. When you disrupted the system by outperforming the golden child, they had to either recalibrate their entire worldview or reject the evidence. They chose the easier path. Damon's advice was more strategic. Channel this energy into making Westlake an unqualified success. Let the results speak for themselves. Some people need years to process being wrong. I threw myself into both Westlake's restoration and ClearCash's continued expansion. Our Boston office thrived, adding 30 new positions and establishing partnerships with major financial institutions. The company's valuation climbed to $800 million as we approached potential IPO territory. 3 months after the purchase, I received an unexpected visitor at Westlake, my grandmother Evelyn, who arrived unannounced one Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing renovation plans in the library. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," she announced as she settled into an antique chair. "But I've been reading about what you're doing with this place, and I wanted to see it for myself." I gave her a tour of the mansion, explaining the restoration process and the educational programs we were developing. She listened attentively, asking insightful questions and occasionally touching the woodwork or fixtures with reverence. "Your grandfather would have loved this," she said as we finished in the garden. "He always said you had a spark none of the rest of us understood." "Mom and Dad still aren't speaking to me," I admitted, the pain still fresh. Grandma Evelyn took my hand. They're trapped in old patterns, seeing you as you were, not as you are. But I see you, Ashley. What you've built, both your company and this place, it matters. Don't let their limitations define your achievements. Her visit was brief but healing, the first family contact that acknowledged my success, without qualification or comparison. Before leaving, she pressed a small box into my hand. Inside was my grandfather's pocket watch, a family heirloom that traditionally went to the eldest son. "He wanted you to have this," she whispered. "I've been waiting for the right moment." As fall turned to winter, the intensity of the family conflict gradually subsided into a cold silence. Thomas eventually secured financing for a smaller development project across town. My parents maintained their position of solidarity with him, sending holiday cards addressed to Clear Cash offices rather than to me personally. I accepted the estrangement as the price of authenticity. For the first time, I had acted according to my own values and capabilities without diminishing myself to maintain family harmony. The loss of their approval was painful, but the freedom from constantly seeking it was unexpectedly liberating. By December, the first phase of Westlake's restoration was complete, the gardens cleared and replanted according to the original 1,924 designs, the exterior stonework cleaned and repaired, the roof and major systems modernized while maintaining historical integrity. I hosted a small ceremony to celebrate these milestones, attended by Harold Pierce, local officials, preservation experts, and close friends. My family's absence was conspicuous but no longer devastating. I had built a community of support based on shared values and mutual respect rather than obligation. Standing in the restored Grand Hall that evening, surrounded by people who appreciated both the property's history and its future potential, I realized I had achieved something my brother never could: a legacy that would outlast quarterly profit reports or luxury condominium sales. The journey had been painful, but necessary. In breaking free from my family's limiting narrative, I had discovered my own. 1 year after purchasing Westlake Mansion, I stood on its sprawling front lawn watching workers install the new sign, Westlake Center for Technology and Cultural Heritage. The spring sunshine caught the gold lettering, making it gleam against the restored stone facade of the mansion. The property's transformation had been comprehensive but respectful of its history. The main house now functioned as the headquarters for the foundation, with public areas showcasing original architectural features and exhibits on local history. The ballroom had been converted into a state-of-the-art technology education center where local students learned coding and digital skills. The gardens had been fully restored and open to the public, becoming a popular spot for weekend visitors. This physical restoration had paralleled my personal journey of rebuilding and redefining success on my own terms. Clear Cash had successfully gone public 3 months earlier, with a market valuation exceeding $1 billion. I had officially joined the ranks of tech founders who had transformed an idea into a publicly traded company. Financial publications that had once dismissed finance apps targeting non-experts now praised our visionary approach to democratizing financial literacy. The professional triumph was satisfying, but the personal growth had been more profound. Weekly therapy sessions had helped me unravel decades of family conditioning that had linked my worth to external validation. Meditation practices had strengthened my ability to distinguish between constructive feedback and echoes of my parents' criticism. Gradually, I had built a solid sense of self that existed independently of others' perceptions. My relationship with my immediate family remained strained but had evolved from active conflict to a detached civility. My parents occasionally sent formal emails acknowledging professional milestones reported in the press. Thomas and I maintained a careful distance, interacting only at unavoidable community events with minimal conversation. The most unexpected development came 6 months after the IPO, when Thomas requested a meeting. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown that neither of us frequented. He arrived looking less polished than usual, his typically immaculate appearance showing signs of stress. "I'll get straight to the point," he said after minimal pleasantries. "My development company is in trouble. The housing market has shifted, investors are pulling back, and I'm facing potential bankruptcy." I listened without interrupting as he outlined his financial predicament: overextended credit lines, properties that wouldn't sell in the current market, partners threatening litigation. The picture he painted was grimmer than I had imagined. "I need capital to weather this downturn," he concluded. I thought, Given your recent liquidity event from the IPO, you might be in a position to help. The request was jarring in its lack of self-awareness. After years of dismissing my work, months of publicly criticizing me, and no genuine acknowledgement of his own role in our family dysfunction, Thomas was approaching me purely as a financial resource. "What exactly are you asking for?" I inquired, keeping my tone neutral. $2 million would stabilize the immediate situation. I could offer equity in future projects once the market recovers. I considered how different versions of myself would have responded to this request at different points in my life. The younger Ashley would have agreed immediately, desperate for family approval. The angry Ashley of a year ago might have refused outright with righteous indignation. The person I had become could respond more thoughtfully. "I won't be making a direct investment," I said finally. "But I can offer something else." ClearCash has a business restructuring division that works with companies facing financial challenges. They provide expertise in debt restructuring, operational efficiency, and strategic pivoting. "I can connect you with their team if you're interested." Thomas's expression hardened. "I'm not looking for corporate consultants. I need capital from someone who understands my vision. What I understand is that injecting cash without addressing underlying business issues rarely solves the problem," I replied. "The consultancy would be my contribution, professional guidance rather than money." "So that's a no," he said flatly. "It's a different kind of yes. The kind that might actually help long term." Thomas left shortly after, rejecting my offer and our interaction returning to its familiar pattern of mutual disappointment. But something had shifted within me. I had offered genuine help based on what I believed would actually serve him, rather than what would make him momentarily grateful or make me feel needed. This evolution in perspective extended to all areas of my life. I began setting healthier boundaries with work, delegating more responsibility to my capable executive team. I developed friendships based on authentic connection rather than utility. I even attempted dating again, approaching relationships with a new clarity about my needs and values. The Westlake Center became the physical embodiment of this personal transformation. What had begun partly as a competitive gesture had evolved into a genuine passion for preserving history while fostering innovation. The center's programs bridged traditional crafts with cutting-edge technology, much as I had finally integrated my family's values of tangible achievement with my own digital expertise. 6 weeks after Thomas's request for financial assistance, I made one last visit to my childhood home. My parents were traveling in Europe, giving me the opportunity to collect remaining belongings from my old bedroom without confrontation. The house felt smaller than I remembered, the decor unchanged since my teenage years. In my bedroom, forgotten artifacts of my early interest in technology remained dog-eared programming books hidden behind fashion magazines, a bulletin board with sketches of app interfaces I'd dreamed up before smartphones existed, the ancient desktop computer where I'd taught myself HTML late at night. As I packed these mementos, I realized they represented not just my past interests but early evidence of my authentic self, the person I had always been beneath the family dynamics that had obscured her. Taking these items felt like reclaiming pieces of my identity that had been present all along. Before leaving, I wrote a letter to my parents expressing my hope for eventual reconciliation while acknowledging the reality of our current estrangement. I left it propped against a family photo on the mantel, the only one where I appeared to be genuinely smiling, taken at age 8 before I had fully internalized my designated role in the family hierarchy. The following month marked a significant milestone for the Westlake Center, the launch of our Girls in Technology Scholarship Program, which would provide comprehensive tech education and mentorship to young women from underserved communities. The inaugural event brought 50 high school students to the mansion for a day of workshops, panel discussions, and hands-on projects. Standing at the podium in the former ballroom, now fitted with modern technology while preserving its ornate ceiling and chandeliers, I surveyed the audience of bright young faces. Many resembled my younger self, eager for knowledge, hungry for opportunity, uncertain of their place in the world. "Technology isn't just about coding or algorithms," I told them. "It's about solving problems and creating value. Each of you brings a unique perspective that the tech world desperately needs." As I watched the girls collaborate on projects throughout the day, I recognized in their interactions the tentative confidence of emerging self-belief. Some arrived convinced they didn't belong in technology. By afternoon, they were enthusiastically debugging code and proposing innovative solutions. Harold Pierce, now a regular visitor to the center despite his advancing age, observed the activities with evident satisfaction. This is exactly what the old place needed: young energy and purpose. You've given it a new life. It's given me one too, I admitted. That evening, after the students had departed, I walked alone through the quiet mansion. Each room represented a chapter in my journey from the library, where I'd first recognized the property's potential, to the sun porch, where I'd sketched initial renovation plans, to the garden terrace where I'd finally accepted that some family wounds might never fully heal. The $5.2 million I had paid for Westlake now seemed not just a business investment or competitive statement, but an investment in my own healing. The mansion had provided a tangible project through which I could process intangible emotional work, restoring historical features, while simultaneously restoring my self-trust, preserving architectural integrity while preserving my core values. True wealth, I had discovered, wasn't measured in acquisition but in alignment, creating external circumstances that reflected internal values. My family had been right that tangible assets mattered, but wrong about why. The mansion's significance wasn't its market value, but its capacity to embody purpose and create lasting impact. As I stood in the grand entrance hall, the setting sun casting long shadows through stained glass windows, I realized that both ClearCache and Westlake represented different expressions of the same core mission: democratizing access to resources that had traditionally been reserved for the privileged few. Whether financial knowledge or architectural heritage, my work was about removing barriers and creating pathways for others. The path forward remained uncertain in many ways. My relationship with my family might never fully heal. ClearCache would face ongoing challenges in a volatile market. The Westlake Center would require continuous innovation to remain relevant and sustainable. But for the first time, I faced this uncertainty with confidence rather than anxiety. Success wasn't proving my worth to those who couldn't see it, it was creating value aligned with my deepest values and sharing that creation with others who could benefit from it. The mansion that began as a symbol of competition had become something far more meaningful, a testament to the possibility of transformation, both architectural and personal. The house that Thomas had wanted to divide into exclusive private units had instead become a space where diverse communities could gather and grow. The $5.2 million purchase that was intended to prove my capability had ultimately demonstrated something more important: my capacity for purpose beyond proof. What's your experience with family dynamics and competition? Have you ever had to prove yourself to family members who underestimated you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life journeys of overcoming obstacles, and share with anyone who might need to hear that success is the best revenge, but healing is the true victory. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the hardest battles we fight lead us exactly where we're meant to be.